So it's now 2 p.m. Geneva time. So let's officially launch this event. So just for who is in the room, we have many people joining us online. And for who is not familiar to WTO, don't forget that to hear what people will be saying online, you will need to use the headset. It's just basic reminders.
Those that are sitting behind, if you can take one of the seats.
To hear who is online, you need this, so don't hesitate to come. So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to this new BIT Plastic Pollution Dialogue co-organized with the World Trade Organization. I would like to start by thanking the World Trade Organization for welcoming us today in their premises. Since the kickoff of the Geneva BIT Plastic Pollution Dialogues in 2020, the World Trade Organization and its members have regularly contributed to the dialogues. Those of you who regularly join us already know that this third series of dialogues kicked off after the adoption 2 years ago of a historic resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly, setting up the path to a global treaty to end plastic pollution. An important milestone in the drafting of the resolution that was submitted for adoption at the 5th United Nations Environment Assembly was a Ministerial Conference on marine litter and plastic pollution, co-organized by the governments of Ecuador, Germany, Ghana, and Vietnam, that was hosted here at the World Trade Organization in September 2021, and which led to the first draft of the historical resolution tabled by the governments of Peru and Rwanda. While all eyes are on the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop this international legally binding instrument that was set up following the adoption of the resolution and which will meet for its fourth session, so referred to as INC4, taking place in 2 weeks in Ottawa, Canada, today's event is the occasion to remember that in the multilateral system, we have other processes contributing to tackling plastic pollution. In Geneva, plastics is indeed addressed in many fora, and these various multilateral processes also contribute and engage in the INC process, hoping for a timely outcome. So taking place during the intersessional period ahead of INC4, today's dialogue will present and discuss the World Trade Organization dialogue on plastics pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade, Ministerial Statement that was released earlier this year at the World Trade Organization Ministerial Conference, and how harnessing trade can contribute to end plastic pollution. In preparation for INC4, we have already hosted 6 dialogues discussing key thematics and launching important documents to feed the negotiators. And there are at least 5 more dialogues that we will be hosting in the coming days ahead of INC4, discussing different topics. Most of these events are online, and this reminds me to welcome also the hundreds of people who are joining us today on WebEx or will later watch the video of this event. And finally, let me also remind our audience that the dialogues are organized by the Geneva Environment Network in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, IUCN, Norway, Switzerland, the Forum on Trade, Environment, and SDGs, known as TESS, and the University of Geneva. And today's event will be moderated by Daniel Ramos, who is the Secretary of the Dialogue on Plastics Pollution at the World Trade Organization. And before you are formally welcome, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available on the webpage of this event. And throughout the event, those who have joined us online can ask questions in the Q&A box. So moving now to the formal opening session of this event, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Daniel Ramos.
Thank you, Gianna, and thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for helping organize this event, for kickstarting these discussions. And we are very lucky because we have here with us two ambassadors out of the six coordinators of the dialogue who will be providing opening remarks. So without further ado, I will invite first Your Excellency Ambassador Jose Valencia, the permanent representative of Ecuador to the World Trade Organization, to provide some initial remarks, followed by Ambassador Matthew Wilson from Barbados. So, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this great opportunity to be sharing with you around this table. It's great to see here representatives from WTO, certainly the Secretariat, ANTAT, and our friends that are part of the dialogue, members of the World Trade Organization, and other stakeholders around the table. Once again, certainly we don't have to forget all the friends and colleagues and stakeholders connected online and following this conversation. It's a great honor to be here with all of you. I want to thank first Gen Environment and the World Trade Organization for organizing the event. And once again, extending heartfelt welcome to the distinguished participants. We are here to engage in the dialogue on plastic pollution and to deliberate on the advancement of environmentally sustainable plastics. This event marks a significant milestone in our collective journey towards a greener future, and your presence underscores the importance of this critical issue. We know that we are all engaged in the same, with the same purpose, following the same path, and with the same goals in mind. So being here is being somehow in family and able to share and to work and renew the links that we have together. Plastic pollution transcends national boundaries. We all know that, affecting ecosystems and communities worldwide. It is a stark reality that trade in plastic constitutes 5% of global international trade. We repeat this number again and again, but it's good to know and to have that in mind because it underscores certainly the importance of trade and plastics on trade, and how can we do something about it, taking into account this very specific dimension. The statistic highlights the imperative of international cooperation as well, and coordination among member states. Together, we must confront the plastic pollution crisis, addressing its detrimental effects on human health and the environment. The challenge of ending plastic pollution necessitates a collaborative approach, one that spans international supply chains and promotes sustainability throughout the entire life cycle of plastics. As we move forward, it is essential that we critically analyze and evaluate our strategies, taking into account the latest advancements in science, technology, and knowledge. Furthermore, it's vital that we consider the diverse priorities of developing countries, ensuring that our efforts are inclusive and equitable. The Dialogue on Plastics Pollution recent report illuminates the various ways in which governments are implementing trade-related actions and measures to combat plastic pollution. These developments signal a burgeoning opportunity for enhanced cooperation on trade and plastic pollution, an avenue through which we can collectively make significant strides. Ecuador is one of the coordinators. We are proud of this role, and we share that feeling. I'm pretty sure with the other co-coordinators, by Australia, Barbados, China, Fiji, and Morocco. Since its inception in 2019, the dialogue on plastics pollution at the WTO has evolved from exploratory discussions to the implementation of concrete, pragmatic, and effective solutions. This evolution is captured in our Ministerial Statement launching at MC13. Today, with 78 co-sponsors, some representative of 78 sponsors are already participating in this event. The dialogue represents the WTO's largest environmental initiative, predominantly supported by developing countries. This initiative is a testament to our commitment to an open, inclusive, and collaborative process engaging a wide array of stakeholders from international organizations and civil society. Looking ahead, our future endeavors will focus on implementing the MC13 Ministerial Statement, furthering technical discussions and achieving tangible outcomes. This work will be conducted in an open, inclusive, and transparent manner, drawing on insights, lessons, and evidence to highlight the critical role of trade and trade measures in addressing plastic pollution and fostering sustainable development in the end. Furthermore, the dialogue has demonstrated its potential to inform and support the International Negotiation Committee, something that Mrs. Rizzolo has already mentioned, and to enhance collaboration with ongoing processes such as the revision of the World Customs Organization's harmonized system and the implementation of international agreements like the Basel Convention. In closing, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for your engagement and dedication to this cause. Together, we possess the collective wisdom, resources, and determination to make a meaningful impact. Let us seize this opportunity to forge a path towards a sustainable future, free from the scourge of plastic pollution, finding creative solutions for this complex matter, and in the end, looking forward all together for a greener future for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for these inspiring words and your leadership on this file and also in other trade and environment issues as your tirelessly work in the CTE as the chair of the Committee on Trade and Environment demonstrated. Let's now move to another key leader in the dialogue as a coordinator, key coordinator, His Excellency Ambassador Matthew Wilson, Permanent Representative of Barbados to the WTO. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Diana, and all colleagues for putting this event together. For me, the voice of civil society, of think tanks, of academia is so important on this issue, and I really welcome any opportunity to participate in platforms and on dialogues that you lead on. So I have a very complicated relationship with plastics. I mean, I appreciate the convenience, I appreciate the affordability and the multiple uses, but with every day that goes on, I'm seeing what it is doing to our oceans, our waterways, our health, and our ecology. And every day, I'm more convinced that to address the harmful impacts of single-use plastics, trade has a role to play, along with consumption changes, investing in plastic substitutes, paying attention to subsidies to primary plastic production, including fossil fuel subsidies, and supporting developing countries, especially LDCs and SIDS, to transition to more sustainable consumption patterns. And a sidebar, just last week, I was in London on vacation, and I went to a popular coffee shop and I asked them for an espresso. And immediately they put a cover on my espresso cup. And I said, I don't need this, I'm gonna drink this right now. And she said, nope, we have to do this for health and safety reasons. So here's your cover. So I took the cover, I walked 2 seconds, I threw the cover away, and I drank my coffee. And there is my negative contribution to the single-use plastics problem. So all that to say is that one of the things that we also have to do more of going forward is working with the private sector and the big brands to truly get them to see why they need to cut down on single-use plastics. So end sidebar. But I'm a realist, and I know that we cannot and we should not aim for a world free of plastics. To quote the World Bank, plastics are here to stay. But the World Bank estimates that if we maintain the status quo, that if we do nothing to combat the plastics pollution problem, the production of plastics will triple from 460 million tons in 2019, and I always have trouble with these numbers because they're so large, to around 1,100 million tons by 2050. Likewise, the OECD projects in the same circumstances, if we do nothing, not only will the global use of plastics increase in the decades to come, but global plastic waste driven by plastics produced with a short lifespan, such as packaging and construction, will surge to 1,014 million tons in 2060, and that's up from around 350 million tons in 2019. So with global exports of plastics or goods made from plastics more than doubling in value since 2015 and standing at nearly 1.2 trillion US in 2021, it's clear that despite the negative contribution that we all recognize of single-use plastics, we have quite a journey ahead of us. So discussions in the dialogue on plastics pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade is a real demonstration of the critical role that the WTO and trade can play in shaping trade-related interventions at addressing plastics pollution and in setting very clear pathways for sustainable plastics trade. So Barbados' Foreign Minister, Kerry Simmons, joined other coordinators in Abu Dhabi in presenting the DPP Ministerial Statement. And this statement, as my dear friend Jose said, is a product of a real inclusive multi-stakeholder process. It benefited from more than 600 comments from participating members and more than 1,000 comments from DPP stakeholders. So Daniel, my hat off to you. But the real movers of this statement, the experts, Shani, Daniela, Dinesh, they're going to present some specifics of the statement next. But I just really want to highlight three key things. The statement acknowledges that despite the positive role played by plastics in society, there's the universal negative impact that plastics pollution has on the environment, particularly in small vulnerable economies, in small island developing states, and in least developing countries, including as it relates to the blue economy in the form of marine litter, human health, the economy, and of course, livelihoods. The statement also places a spotlight on SIDS, and this is one of the first statements in the WTO to actually specifically recognize the particularities of small island developing states. So for me, that is a real win. And third, it really does validate the extremely positive and inclusive work of the dialogue over the last 2 years and does lay the groundwork for some good future work post MC13, and it serves as a real contribution to the INC process. Now, WTO cannot tackle this alone. UNEP cannot tackle this alone. INC cannot tackle this alone. The CSOs and academia cannot tackle this alone. This has to be a dialogue and a movement going forward based on true partnership. And the actions outlined in the ministerial statement, which are voluntary in nature, they've largely been drawn from what the data and the analysis in our surveys have revealed. That WTO members are already doing many things at the national, regional, and international level, which are replicable and which are scalable, and we need to build on that. We simply cannot afford to stand still. Hence, we have committed to engage in these dedicated discussions aimed at identifying best practices and sharing experiences on a range of topics identified by the dialogue, as well as to contribute and to make sure that we incorporate the trade-related results of the INC negotiations in our DPP and vice versa. So our technical experts have already started to examine possible concrete, pragmatic, and effective outcomes for delivery post MC13 and leading up to MC14. And I hope that this dialogue today will also give us some really good inputs to craft an effective roadmap post MC13. So thank you, Danielle.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And I always personally enjoy very much your anecdotes. They bring really to concrete examples to what we're doing here and what it matters. And sometimes it can be it seems simple, but you know, I can just imagine how much unnecessary waste we produce over and over again in these small steps that we do. After hearing from the ambassadors, and let me already note, ambassadors might need to leave at some point, so they have a busy agenda. So don't be startled if you see them moving around. But as Ambassador Wilson noted, we'll pass now the floor to, I would say, true heroes in this work, because they've been collecting and working together with all co-sponsors and stakeholders and going through those thousands of comments and trying to get into what ended up, in my personal view, being a very strong statement at MC13. So I'll pass the floor to, I'll name them, and I'll leave them to organize themselves, because they've been working together so closely that I'm sure they'll be able to present it to the audience here. I'll call on Ms. Daniela Garcia Freire, Deputy Permanent Representative of Ecuador to the WTO, Ms. Shani Griffin-Jack, First Secretary, Permanent Mission of Barbados to the WTO, and Mr. Dinesh Tanentiraraja, Third Secretary of the Australian Permanent Mission to the WTO. I know Daniela is online and multitasking, so she might not be joining exactly at this moment. So I'll probably pass the floor to either Dinesh or Shani to start while she joins.
Thank you, Danielle. And first, let me thank the Geneva Environment Network and the WTO for organizing this event, and to thank Ambassador Wilson and Ambassador Valencia for really setting the stage for our presentation and the discussions today. Very happy to join Daniela and Dinesh in presenting the MC13 statement of the Dialogue on Plastic Pollution and Sustainable Plastics Trade. Throughout the discussions in the dialogue, there is a common realization that trade is a part of the problem, but that also that it can and must be a part of the solution if we are to address plastics pollution. So the development of the MC13 Ministerial Statement and the continued work ahead in the discussions of the DPP are, among other things, a shared commitment to work towards concrete, pragmatic, and effective outcomes on trade-related aspects of plastics pollution in order to contribute to the global response against plastics pollution. In furtherance of this commitment, the MC13 statement sets out a range of principles and 6 actions where trade can be a key contributor to the response required. Each action is linked to a factual compilation that is attached to the statement, the elements of which consist of trade-related practices that are already being adapted by the WTO members in tackling plastics pollution, and Ambassador Wilson would have alluded to some of these elements. Moving into the specific actions and some of the examples that we can see in the MC13 Ministerial Statement. Action 1 speaks to improving transparency, monitoring and understanding trade flows throughout the value chain of plastics. And here, when we look specifically at the compilation document, we see that some of the examples that are being brought forward is a breakdown of the domestic customs classification to facilitate monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and regulation of trade, and supporting the World Customs Organization in their efforts in this regard. We also have, from the discussions and from the various surveys that would have been conducted over the last 2.5 years, also drawn on identification of customs-related technological solutions. I think technology is one of the core areas that has borne out in the discussions thus far, and how to cooperate with the private sector on standards, product identifiers, and other applications to identify trade flows across the life cycle of plastics. As it relates to Action 2, improving the capacity of developing countries to use trade as a tool to tackle plastic pollution and better match existing funding with trade-related needs. And just to note that one of the main elements that we see in the dialogue is that many developing countries are making efforts nationally to fight plastics pollution. And so I think the membership in itself is a reflection of the need for developing countries to understand and be able to participate in these discussions. Under the compilation, there are a number of issues that members would have highlighted as being critical and needs that need to be included in any form of specific technical assistance and capacity building. And here we see participation in the Global Aid for Trade Review, and this is one of the discussions that we are actually having now within the conversation with the coordinators, and how this can potentially help us to be able to insert the elements of the dialogue as it relates to plastics, but also sharing experiences organizing training sessions, and how domestic private sector engagement and partnerships can be highlighted to the benefit of developing countries. Again, access to technology is one of the areas here that has been highlighted. Civil society engagement, as many of the participants of this session are today. And so the value of the civil society engagement is something that the participants in the DPP have really valued. And again, technical assistance on policy implementation, which oftentimes across the development confines of developing countries is often times an issue. In terms of action 3, promoting cooperative and effective trade-related plastic measures to reduce plastics and plastic products that are harmful to the environment and human health, or unnecessary single-use plastic and plastics packaging associated with international trade that are not essential for medical or sanitary purposes. And in this particular compilation, what is highlighted here are a number of examples of the goods that are most targeted when we speak about trade-related plastic measures. And of the list that we have seen highlighted is packaging, packaging in itself, single-use plastic products in general, but also single-use plastics in terms of plastic bags, tableware, food containers, straws, cup, and the list goes on. I will stop here and hand over to my colleague Denish, who will take you through some of the other actions as it relates to the MC13 Ministerial Statement.
Shani, I'd also like to quickly echo my own thank you to Jen and the WTO for the organisation of this important event today. I'll build on the overview of the first 3 actions Shani noted, which were included in our MC13 statement, and continue noting actions 4 to 6, which were also agreed. Coming to the 4th action, there was agreement on the need to promote cooperative and effective trade-related plastic measures to address the environmental, social, and human health impacts and leakages across the life cycle of plastics, plastic products, and their constituents. Linking again to the factual compilation in the MC13 statement through the surveys and workshops in the DPP, we identified the most often used specific trade-related plastics measures were under 4 different categories. Firstly, technical regulations, which could include eco-design and labeling requirements, bans or prohibitions, which could, for example, target single-use plastics. There were also measures identified under import and export licenses, such as waste management and leakage avoidance, along with, finally, internal taxes, such as repurposing measures. The 5th action, agreed in the MC13 statement, was to promote environmentally sound, safe, and effective non-plastic substitutes, alternatives, services, and technologies. The support measures considered could include grants and direct payments, preference in public procurement, tax concessions, and non-monetary support. This is, of course, a key area of work to do in our collective efforts to address plastic pollution. We recognise that reduction in particular plastics needs to be coordinated with actions towards promoting appropriate alternatives. We have again seen such measures already being considered by members, which is captured in the factual compilation for substitutes, including in algae, bamboo, and glass. Finally, coming to action 6, which covered trade-related cooperation to contribute to the control of transboundary movement of plastic pollution. Of course, recognising here the multifora nature of our work, which is why this seminar today is so valuable. Action 6 highlights as an example the effective implementation by its parties of the Basel Convention on Plastic Waste Amendments and on its plastic technical guidelines. Thank you for your time today, and I'll pass the floor to my fellow coordinator, Daniela, who I believe is joining online.
Let's see if we manage. I'm told that Daniela is having connection issues.
I'm here. Can you listen to me, Daniel?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody. Great to see you all. It's a pleasure to be and presenting the work of the dialogue that, as it was well mentioned, started in 2019, and it has progressed to today's work, where we're implementing the MC13. We are presenting a work plan, and we're looking to implement the MC13 ministerial statement, and of course, looking towards MC14. And just to briefly complement what my fellow co-coordinators, both Shani and Dinesh, mentioned in terms of the actions, and that was very well explained and put forward in terms of what we have achieved as a shared understanding of the dialogue, and how into explaining our next steps. We will have a meeting this Friday, April 12th, and we have shared our vision for a work plan for implementing the MC13 statement to our co-sponsors. This plan is intended to outline, as I mentioned, the implementation of the ministerial statement of the dialogue on plastic pollution and environmentally sustainable plastics trade. And we aim for concrete, pragmatic, effective outcomes on agreed actions and understanding set out in this statement at the latest by MC14. So we have a lot of work to do. We have also put forward a plan to host 2 plenary sessions and 3 pre-plenary sessions meetings in 2024. In our plan. And of course, as Shani well mentioned, take advantage also of the great expertise of our stakeholders to inform the participation of the members of the dialogue. As a members-driven process, we're advancing together with coordinators, with the co-facilitators, and with all members to advance on this plan. So looking forward also for contributions in terms of members' experiences, and of course, inputs in terms of advancing in the 3 work streams that we look forward to work to maintaining the same engagement and that we had that we have had since our MC that we had for our MC12 ministerial statement, and we will maintain these 3 work streams in terms of cross-cutting issues, reduction to tackle plastic pollution, but also promoting trade to tackle plastic pollution. We welcome a new co-facilitator, Switzerland, for work stream 3, and we look forward to work together with everybody in the different topics that are of interest of the membership. As I mentioned, and as it was mentioned well by Dinesh and Shani, and ambassadors, of course, this remains a dialogue that is open to all members, and we look forward to work in an inclusive, transparent, and efficient way towards pragmatic and concrete outcomes in MC14. To conclude, there is a lot of opportunities also in the engagement of the dialogue with other processes, and the dialogue has been an example in terms of how to break silos while maintaining coherence, but also calling for concrete action in the trade arena when it's about contributing to tackling environmental challenges such as the plastic pollution crisis. I just want to thank the Secretariat. Daniel, our Secretary, has been amazing in terms of advancing and supporting, advancing with us and supporting us. So thank you, Daniel. Your work has been key for this, and looking forward to work with everybody. Thanks, Diana, for organizing this amazing presentation and for always supporting us in bringing the trade community to the environmental community and putting us together. And I will stop there. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you again, as usual, for doing much more than what any human being could do, multitasking and doing so many different hats and so many different processes, being a key part of all of them. So I think as we heard, there is a lot of substance in the ministerial statement. And as Daniela said, and the ambassadors referred to, one of the key aspects of not only of the dialogue, but other environmental initiatives that the WCO has been the strong engagement from stakeholders, bringing this key information, technical knowledge, scientific information to the table for delegations to discuss. So it's my pleasure now to move to the panel discussion part of this event, where I can see many friendly faces, either here in the room or online, among these stakeholders that really helped build the substance and help delegates here lead their work on the topic. So I'll go through the order of the list that I have in front of me. I'll first call on Mr. Mahesh Sugatan, Senior Policy Advisor at the Forum on Trade and Environment and the SDGs TESS, to reflect a little bit on the MC13 and talk about how trade can be a tool to tackle plastic pollution. Mahesh, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to the WTO and Geneva Environment Network for the invitation to join this event. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of TESS and to share some reflections on why we at TESS view the work of the DPP and its recent ministerial statement at MC13 as such an important contribution to global efforts to tackle plastic pollution. As has been mentioned, a critical aspect of the MC13 statement is that it includes a commitment by members to step up individual and collective trade-related action on a voluntary basis and through international cooperation to address plastic pollution. So first, it's useful to step back to remind ourselves of why is it so significant that trade ministries and trade policy experts are engaged alongside environment and other ministries in work to enhance trade-related cooperation on plastic pollution. It's widely accepted that ending plastic pollution will require transformation of the plastics economy, reshaping production and consumption across the full life cycle of plastics and plastic products. And this will be necessary across a range of sectors, from textiles to personal care products to agriculture, the fisheries sector, and even construction and automobiles. In most cases, this will also require actions across supply chains. Now, research generated over the past few years has highlighted that international trade plays a key role across the full life cycle of plastics, from primary polymers in the form of resins and fibers to additives, intermediate plastics, final plastic products, plastic packaging, and waste being shipped across the world, often crossing borders multiple times. So transforming the plastics economy will also involve international cooperation on trade. For this, we will need a better understanding of various aspects of plastics trade, including, for example, geography and trade flows associated with value chains and various life cycle stages of plastics, standards and regulations that shape or may be needed to shape plastics production and consumption. Trade-related action and cooperation on plastic pollution will also require understanding of the types of trade policies and regulations that countries are already deploying to address plastics pollution and their trade implications. We know that trade will also have a role to play in restricting or eliminating the type of plastics that are known to be the most problematic or harmful to human health and environment, as well as unnecessary plastics in supply chains, such as unnecessary packaging. Trade will also have a role in expanding access to and uptake of technologies, services, and other goods that can support efforts to address plastic pollution, such as environmentally sound and safe plastic waste management goods and services, technologies for greener production processes, and environmentally sound, safe, and effective non-plastic substitutes. Now, on each of these issues, the DPP has already been playing a very valuable role in building understanding. And this is well reflected in the DPP MC13 ministerial statement, which offers a list of actions that members could pursue individually and collectively that address each of these trade-related aspects that I mentioned. The statement and the accompanying compilations reflect an inclusive process of sharing experiences and identifying best practices, including through contributions of stakeholders, which has been a key success story of the DPP process. Critical to note also is that the diversity of the DPP 78 members engaging the world's largest economies, members from all regions and all levels of development, including LDCs and SITs. In a context where collaboration among diverse countries can be difficult to foster, the DPP is remarkable in that the attention to an inclusive process and statement that reflects a balance of interests focused on a clearly defined problem has been able to generate broad support. Another key feature of the DPP process is that meetings and compilations have drawn together information on actions and initiatives already being pursued or being intended to be pursued by WTO member states. So in this regard, the ministerial statement can provide both information and inspiration to the environment negotiators and policymakers who are involved currently in the ongoing negotiations for a new international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. Now, given that the topic of today is also a call for action, I want to close by highlighting the opportunity provided by the shift in focus reflected in the MC30 ministerial statement from identifying issues to forging action on concrete outcomes. To move from a call to action to actual action, a key priority in the coming months will keep high in everybody's mind is to keep high in everybody's mind the minister's call for further concrete, pragmatic, and effective outcomes by MC14. In this regard, WTO members will need to be prepared to consider on which of the listed actions in the ministerial statement they can come forward with examples, suggestions, commitments, or pledges in regard to domestic action, as well as where they could cooperate with other WTO members or groups of members. In most cases, this will require careful consultation with the national environment authorities, stakeholders, and industry. But in good news, there is already considerable experience and expertise on trade-related measures and opportunities for cooperation that can be built on. We, along with other stakeholders involved in the DPP, look forward to seeing what members are able to develop and will continue to provide suggestions and ideas on specific options. So with that, I'd like to close and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. Very inspiring, and also appreciate, as usual, the very concrete suggestions at the beginning, listing the things where you and Tess see the dialogue as being able to move things forward in the fight against plastic pollution. Personally, I think that is always very inspiring to hear. Now let me move to our next, and again, just a reminder for those online or in the room, we will, after this round of panel interventions, there will be some time, hopefully, for Q&A. So if you have your questions, you can start thinking about them. Can also be directed to the panel discussants. Let's move now to Ms. Gail Gruby, another very strong friend, I have to say, of the dialogue for a while. She's the Deputy Director of the Tariff and Trade Affairs at the World Customs Organization, and she will, again, reflect on what happened at MC13, but also talk about increasing transparency of trade flows of plastics. Gail, do we have you on the call?
You do. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for this. Thank you. I have to say the work done at MC13 is an acknowledgement that the problems of the tsunami of plastic that flows through trade are not going to be addressed by solved by seeking to influence consumption side alone. Now, while there is the production and trade of unsustainable levels of non-essential plastics, while this continues at these astoundingly high levels that people have spoken about today, it will find markets, and even if unsold, would still contribute to the environmental issues that the ministerial statement lays out. So we need to recognise, and this is the need recognised by the DPP, to work on the trade side to enable its transformation to an environmentally sustainable trade is essential. And I also would like to acknowledge, of course, that the role of the WCO and its members in helping to achieve greater transparency, monitoring and understanding of trade flows and the successful implementation of concrete measures at the border is important here. As agencies that implement the border policy, customs around the world are critical to the success of any governmental border measures. Now, we've been working at the WCO with the WTO and various member states involved in the DPP to create greater transparency by proposing the separate identification of various goods within the scope of the statement, within the International Convention on the Harmonised Commodity Description and Coding System, and that mouthful was the official name of the Harmonised System, or HS, which is used for the classification of goods to 6 digits internationally. The advantage of this for people who are less familiar with the HS, the advantage of separate identification in the HS for a particular type of goods means that you can see these goods in trade. You can see the amounts of these goods that flow in and out of countries through the data on customs declarations. And if appropriate, it also enables custom countries to much more easily apply measures. Without separate identification, they are simply lost in larger groups of goods, and the knowledge of trade flows is far more opaque. Now, I'm a little bound here because I can't discuss proposals under negotiation in a public forum, but I can say that this work is proceeding through the Harmonised System Review Subcommittee with an overall positive response. And while there will always be changes to opening proposals, I foresee a very good chance on the successful introduction of a number of new subheadings to better identify goods of interest for HS 2028. And as said, this will increase the available information on the trade in these commodities. And when concrete measures may be implemented, it also reduces the likelihood of differing definitions at national borders, which can create substantial difficulties for industry compliance and planning. However, I'd like to emphasise that there's always scope for further work, and we encourage trade and environment administrations to work with their customs administrations to make further proposals. And while drafting negotiations for HS 2028 will finish in November this year, any outstanding proposals can still be carried over to the negotiations for 2033. Hence, it's still useful to get these proposals in as soon as possible. Now, I'd like to make one point of special note, is that while in these opening proposals we've included separate identification of several polymers of interest based on their biodegradability characteristics or their renewable sources, and on some non-plastic alternatives, this is not actually extended to include proposals for differentiating between virgin and recycled plastics, nor differentiations based on the actual biodegradability. And this limited coverage relates to the varying degrees of technical difficulties in verifying the identification of preferable plastics and recycled plastics at the border. These can include difficulties in finding suitable analytical methods, the absence of clear and universally accepted standards, and the high use of additives in plastics that can affect their environmental impact. So while the separate identification of the preferable plastic polymers proposed is a very useful step forward, more work is needed to be able to go further again. So I would personally encourage the experts in trade and environment administrations to work closely with their customs administrations and the relevant industries to find ways to overcome these practical difficulties so we can give maximum support to members through the HS. And even if this work doesn't sufficiently resolve difficulties for HS implementation, it still supports alternative measures, including alternative customs measures that can be explored with better knowledge of what is needed for practical identification. I'm also very happy to be able to report that the WCO and its members have been working very successfully with the Basel Convention Secretariat for better distinguishing hazardous plastic waste subject to Basel Convention procedures. And this is part of the overall ongoing work between the WCO and Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention Secretariat over multiple editions of the HS to expand coverage of the BRS provisions. Now, of course, the HS is about the illicit trade, and that's only part of it. At the WCO, my colleagues are also working on multiple fronts to improve procedures and compliance in relation to the trade of plastic waste, or the illicit trade, to help, again, ensure that the trade of these goods is properly managed. Goods illegally traded are another side of customs work, and in this we have also been working with our members to improve enforcement in the ongoing fight against cross-border environmental crime. I'd just like to finish by congratulating the DPP for this significant step forward. We all know the increasing impact and existential threat of what we are facing from climate change and environmental degradation. So it's very important, and it is, I should say, but it is very important that the scale of the threat can't paralyse us. It is only by countries working together on the DPP, on the INC negotiations, and on hundreds and even thousands of other fronts that we can again prove the ability of human ingenuity to overcome what can initially seem insurmountable challenges. change is possible. So I wish us all the required determination and courage to find the paths that will see us achieve a better future. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Gail. And it might sound, for those that are not in deep into the trade work, that is a little bit exoteric to be talking about harmonized system of classification, but this is actually how we see things in trade. And if we don't see things, it's very hard to work and try to change things. So thank you so much. I'll move now directly to Ms. Megan Jung Vivatanapon, Conservation Support Officer at the Pew Charitable Trust. We'll be talking about reducing harmful or unnecessary single-use plastics and plastic packaging. Thank you, Megan. I think that it's quite early there where you are, or relatively early, so thank you for joining us. I'll just remind the presenters to keep the statements to 5 minutes, so we can have a little bit of time at the end for questions. But good to see you, Megan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Daniel, and not too early. And thank you to the Geneva Environmental Network and to the World Trade Organization for inviting me to speak today. The Pew Charitable Trust has been an observer of the dialogue on plastic pollution for the past 2 years. And in that time, we've been able to share our research with the DPP, for example, showing that it is possible to reduce plastic pollution by 80% by 2040 with the solutions we have today. Our research also shows that cutting plastic pollution will require a system change wherein we reduce the amount of plastic we're using, find substitutes and alternatives, improve recycling, and expand waste management systems. Today, I'd like to make 3 main points. First, that single-use plastics and plastics packaging are highly polluting and need to be addressed immediately. 2, many WTO members are already working on these items through trade-related plastic measures. And 3, the DPP has an opportunity to make a difference at the global plastic treaty negotiations and at MC14, especially if it focuses its work plan on a handful of select issues that enable members to take action, including such as on single-use plastics and packaging. Changing the plastic system will mean many of the single-use plastic products we know and use today will need to be eliminated or replaced by reusable items and new delivery models, as single-use plastics and plastics packaging are highly polluting. The need to address single-use plastics and plastics packaging is repeated again and again in the research. According to beach cleanup data, single-use plastic items are the predominant items contributing to macroplastic pollution. Our research, based on waste characterization data, shows 5 product types are responsible for 85% of plastic leakage today. These are monomaterial films, carrier bags, bottles, sachets and multi-layer films, and household goods. Many of these categories are single-use items. Further, a report by the Nordic Council Ministers published last year notes that a key driver to reduce plastic production and consumption is a shift away from single-use plastics, and the report encourages bans on avoidable single-use plastics. A WWF report, Breaking Down High-Risk Plastics, also published last year, identifies high-risk plastic products with packaging as one of the worst offenders. Meanwhile, design and packaging choices often do not account for local infrastructure. Globalized supply chains of consumer goods fail to account for the realities of local waste management infrastructure available to deal with them, meaning package is often not recycled, becomes litter, and the value of plastic packaging is lost to the economy after a single-use cycle. We continue to believe that the WTO plays a crucial role in achieving the goal of ending plastic pollution, and the DPP's commitment to finding trade solutions to the problem of plastic pollution is evidenced by the MC13 statement. The factual compilations accompanying the statement serve as a useful indication of just how much work is already underway by members. We commend members for their contributions to this process, and in particular, the co-coordinators for driving the process forward. The DPP's work up to now, including the outcomes at MC13, have given us a foundation, and now we need to build out the structure. The factual compilations are informative in identifying thematic areas that might be ripe for greater cooperative action. Single-use plastic and packaging are products which are most often identified in current trade-related plastic measures and would be good candidates for deeper discussion among members. From research that IISD published last year, looking at 93 trade-related plastic measures that WTO members had reported on between 2009 and 2021, bans on single-use plastic items appeared the most frequently. Action so far has been concentrated on a relatively small number of product categories and primarily through bans. Further, the measures are not harmonized. A forward work plan narrowed in focus could help the DPP facilitate discussions to expand measures geographically. For example, could more members take up actions already taken by others? Could sharing best practices allow new measures to be designed to enhance effectiveness or minimize disruption? Or could they be expanded thematically? Are there products that are rarely targeted by members but deserve to be? Which products are contributors to the environmental problem? For example, excessive plastic packaging. The DPP has repeatedly emphasized the importance of cooperation. This emphasis comes at a critical juncture in negotiations to agree on an internationally legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. And negotiators will soon meet in Ottawa at the end of April to pick up discussions. Trade provisions will be an important part of what could be agreed in the treaty. While there's necessarily an interconnectedness between the work of the DPP and work in other environmental bodies such as the INC, it's clear that there is still a distinct need for a dedicated trade discussion as to truly grapple with plastic pollution, and this will require transformative shifts in economies around the world. To sum up on the DPP can deliver tangible, concrete outcomes ahead of or at MC14, and we recommend selecting a handful of focus issues, such as single-use plastics, plastics packaging, that aim to enable members to take action. Many members are already working on addressing these items, and they could share their lessons learned by focusing in and sharing how trade policy can contribute to ending plastic pollution. By selecting issues ripe for action, as we've suggested, the work of the DPP for the next 2 years will not prejudge any outcome at the INC, rather it will complement it and build on existing efforts around the world. We look forward to continued discussions on this important issue and happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Megan. Very well structured and direct. I think we appreciate that always from Pew. Let me then move now to our next speaker, our friends and brothers here in Geneva, as Ms. Chantaline Carpentier, Head of the Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development at UNCTAD, and to share the work, as many of you know, they've been fundamental on a very key part of the dialogue on plastic substitutes, alternative services and technologies. Please, Chantaline.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and I must acknowledge that the work is done mostly by my colleague, Enrique Pacini, not by me, but he's told me that the DPP has done wonderful work as I join my colleagues here from New York. Maybe what I want to do quickly is to address, to congratulate the DPP colleagues, because to address not plastic in the silo, but to address it in the triple environmental crisis, and I'm sure that my colleague Sandra is going to mention that, but we feel this is very important because there's too many people talking about transition, but it's going to be transitions, because it's many of these will have transformative impact, as Megan was mentioning, on different area, and we need to be really aware of the synergies and trade-offs amongst themselves, but also with the other SDGs. And so congratulations on that. We're also looking at the investment trends, because one of the fear that we have is, on the one hand, investment in substitute, non-plastic substitute that could be then having an impact on biodiversity, or investment in alternative plastics that then give a second life to some of the fossil fuel based plastic that we may not achieve the environmental goal that we have. So this is something that we've also addressed in the G20 Green and Just Transition paper that we submitted with UNIDO, ILO, and the OECD. And so congratulations on this. Now, in terms of the issues, we see them, and the way we in 3 areas. Let's keep it simple. One is so trends and data to follow the trends. So as you know, we've been using the HS code, and we will be developing a database of plastic substitute using the 282 HS code to complement the existing plastic trade database that we have. And then out of these, what we can see is that, as has been mentioned, there's 269 million tons of plastic traded in 2021 alone, and 0.2% of which is traded plastic scrap, and that's scrap. or crap. Nice little like lip sip. And partly because of lack of capacity to recycle, perhaps. So this is something that you're addressing in terms of services, and this is an area that also we look forward to support you in for end-of-life treatment. The other thing is from our data, and I would like maybe Claudia, if you can put, so afterward. So basically in the trade of plastic, what we see is that the alternatives are very, very low. So world trade is 1 billion. Plastic substitute is about a third of that. That we've mentioned, and plastic alternative, as I said, is less than 1%. But what we're saying is that so that's the data and the trends. The second one I want to address is the entrepreneurs and the startups and those that are actually developing those alternatives, those substitutes. And we've been working with several of them. You can't see much on this, unfortunately, but what you have at the top is trade measures. And the columns are our partners on our SMEP project that is financed by the UK. And so these are all entrepreneurs working on plastic substitute in these different countries. And what we have asked them is if we have trade measures, which are the top one that you see there, or domestic measure at the bottom, is it going to help or impinge on your work that you're doing? And if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is current. And then this is if we have these new measures that you're talking about in the DPP, for instances. And you don't need to be able to read the whole slide except to realize that there's more green than there's red in the second slide. So they see these as positive for their business. And of course, because those are in these sectors, but I think it's very important that we get that support. The third area is to be on the transparency side, this idea that they are increasingly, we did a study that will be published shortly on the notification to WTO. And what we see is that notification trade-related policy measure on non-plastic substitute are going faster than others. And that could be a further constraint to their trading. So it's something for the DPP to perhaps keep in mind. But also another area of future, and then Ambassador Wilson, you did mention the health prerogative that they gave you for your lid on your cup of coffee. And one area that Enrique and colleagues have been working on that is very interesting is to look at what are the environmental impact of removing these plastic from the environment. And they measure them not in dollars, but in days and years of saved life at the end. And so some of them, for instance, in Ghana cleanup project on plastic board, leads to 27 days gain at the end of the life of people, while the one in Kenya on plastic boat actually increased the potential life of people by 24 years. That's significant. So the health impact is real, but how do we ensure that we don't have the health impact kind of offset the environmental impact when we try to put these policies in place? And finally, because I'm already reaching my 5 minutes, Danielle, you can count on the full support of UNCTAD in continuing to look at the evidence base in terms of mapping, including marine-based plastic substitute, because increasingly, as I mentioned earlier, we'll need those, and as well as with ISO on biodegradable and compostable, and the health issues, as well as technical assistance for developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantaline, and true to form, as always, UNCTAD bringing data and innovative ways of looking at things. So I think that's also always appreciated in these discussions. Let me move now to the next speaker, which is actually in-house now. She's our own in-house environment expert, Ms. Sandra Averu-Moneri. She's currently economic officer at the WTO, but she's on secondment from UNEP, and she is being very, very helpful to us here, trying to bring fresh perspective, some technical knowledge, and she will speak from more of an environment perspective on the issues of today. Please, Sandra, you had the floor.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and hello, everyone. Pleasure to be speaking today. I'll keep focusing on the environmental point of view, even if definitely the social element, the economic element, the human health elements, the inclusiveness are also extremely important, but sticking to the 5 minutes, I'll try to focus on the environment. Just to give a context, we've heard 460 million tons of plastics are produced annually. This is coming from the OECD. We heard of the projection as well by 2050 that could be tripled. Out of these 460 million tons of plastic, 30 million tons actually are secondary plastics. So it's a small amount at the moment. And 2/3 of this annual production are what we call single-use here, that the OECD is calling short-lived products. So they soon become waste, as we could hear from Ambassador Wilson earlier and his anecdote on the plastic cup for coffee. So with this context in mind, I wanted to highlight the contribution that plastics and plastic pollution is having to the triple global environmental challenges or triple planetary crisis sometimes of pollution, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And I wanted to highlight just a few data or few information related to each of them. On pollution, plastics is filling our oceans and sometimes even working their way into the human food chain through fishes or through mollusks. Referring to pollution, I think we can look into two types of pollution. The physical one, the one that we see when marine wildlife is being chucked and we see the images of the turtles and kangaroos, for example. Another type of pollution is what I would call the invisible pollution and linked to toxicity, to chemicals in plastics, or to microplastics in waters, such as in ocean, rivers, or in our groundwaters. So I'd like to mention the recent Plastchem report that was just out, actually presented in a Gen event recently, that found about 16,000 of plastic chemicals with at least 4,200 that are considered by the authors highly hazardous to human health and the environment. And I can't resist, because I've been coordinating the UNEP report on chemicals in plastic before joining the WTO, and seeing that we had in the report about 13,000 chemicals in plastics. So numbers are increasing in about a year or so, meaning that the research is ongoing and advancing, and I can only commend this. On biodiversity, I will mention the still recently approved Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and the fact that it acknowledges that plastic pollution impacts biodiversity and ecosystems. And in particular, Target 7 is focusing on reducing pollution to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity, and specifically calls for preventing, reducing, and working towards elimination of plastic pollution by 2030. And finally, on climate change, also from the OECD analysis, the production of plastic is one of the most energy-intensive manufacturing processes in the world, and in 2019, plastic generated 1.8 billion metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, representing 3.4% of global emissions. So this state of play requires action, and we can see in the DPP Ministerial Statement, in the Dialogue Ministerial Statement, that this statement is sending a strong signal. It's outlining concrete actions from trade ministers to contribute towards addressing growing environmental, but as I mentioned, also health, economic costs of plastic pollution. So if I turn to the ministerial statements, our topic of today, I just wanted to quote The statement expresses deep concern about the triple global environmental challenges and recognizes that these challenges are interlinked, reinforcing and driven largely by unsustainable patterns of consumption and production and disposal and their related economic and health costs. In the preamble, the ministerial statement is acknowledging the adverse effect of plastic pollution and of plastic waste and the negative impacts on the environment, among others. All actions that are in the statement currently are very relevant and informative from an environmental point of view. And let me illustrate it briefly with two, with the reduction one and with the transparency one that were covered today. The action to reduce plastics that are harmful to environment or to human health or unnecessary single-use plastic and plastic packaging would allow prevention of plastic pollution and would lead to lower pressure on the environment. It's obvious, but it's nice to state and important to state. Looking at transparency and the transparency actions, we heard some examples earlier, including from the World Customs Organization, and these actions will certainly further inform decision makers and facilitate the monitoring, the evaluation, the reporting, the regulation of trade in polymers, in chemicals, in plastic products. From a very environmental perspective, and maybe I'll give my perspective if you allow me, I really believe the statement shows the readiness of the trade community to act and responding de facto to the UNIA resolution 5/14 that is calling for stakeholders to take action. And in fact, many actions have been taken already, and they are indicated in the annexes of the ministerial declaration. Members of the DPP have been putting actually in practice the Marrakesh Agreement preamble. In my view, they have and will continue to highlight the role of trade in achieving the objective of sustainable development and the need to protect and preserve the environment when it comes to plastics pollution. So it's time for more effective, more concrete, more pragmatic actions to take the words of the ministerial statement and display how trade and environment can be mutually supportive to address challenges of our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Always good to be reminded and updated about the environmental reasons behind why this work started and is being pursued. And now, finally, we move to the next speaker and the last in my list, Ms. Juliette Voinov-Koller, Senior Legal Officer and Chief Officer in Charge, the governance branch of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions, which has been a very key stakeholder as well to the dialogue, and to talk about the cooperation between the dialogue and these very important efforts under the BRS conventions. So please, Juliette, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, panelists, of course, who preceded me and leave me very humble at this time. Colleagues in GEN and WTO for the invitation, and all the other colleagues across the UN system and elsewhere with whom we are cooperating. And it's a daily job. We heard we cannot do it alone. There are plenty of opportunities for cooperation. And indeed, I think cooperation is alive and kicking. And this event is one demonstration of this cooperation. And I'll try to show a bit other examples through my presentation. First of all, to give you, I'll try to make this work. Yes, just in a nutshell, who am I representing here? I work for the Secretariat of 3 MEAs. You will know them, they're referenced in the ministerial statement, the Basel, the Rotterdam, and the Stockholm Conventions. This is just a slide to show the scope, basically, and the breadth of the number of member states of WTO that are actually working through the Basel and the Rotterdam and the Stockholm Convention to address the plastic pollution crisis. Under the Basel Convention, we have 191 parties, so it's a nearly universal MEA treaty. It addresses the environmentally sound management of the wastes that are covered. But before that, prevention and minimization of waste generation. So really at the upstream, at the beginning of the life cycle of waste management. And at the heart of the Basel Convention is this prior informed consent procedure, which is the most closely related to trade control mechanism embodied in the treaty. For the Rotterdam Convention, it has 166 parties. It has within its scope 55 chemicals, and it essentially is there to promote information exchange on chemicals of concern, whether they're industrial or pesticides. And it also has at its heart a prior informed consent procedure, which is slightly different from the one under the Basel Convention. But again, it's the same idea, is that there is international trade. It should rely upon the prior informed consent of the parties engaged in the trade. And finally, the Stockholm Convention, which has 186 parties. It addresses specific types of chemicals that are called persistent organic pollutants. And the convention goes a bit further than its two siblings, I would say, because the goal here is to actually either restrict or eliminate production and international trade of those chemicals that are considered of concern to human health and the environment. And the protection of human health and the environment is what brings those three treaties together to try to promote a life cycle approach to chemicals of most concern. Now, this slide was prepared for the INC process. So we're now in the world of actually cooperation between the BRS conventions and the INC process, which is now ongoing. The BRS team will be represented at INC 4 and INC 5. We have been engaged since the beginning, as much as we have been engaged in the DPP process as a stakeholder, just as concrete examples, again, of working together. What we're bringing from BRS perspectives to the INC process are these pillars of the Basel Convention and Stockholm Convention primarily. So the control of transboundary movements of plastic wastes, the obligations under the convention to minimize waste generation and ensure the environmentally sound management of plastic wastes. And then when we turn to Stockholm, it's really about looking at the most hazardous constituents that are additives added to plastic to make better plastic, if you wish, on one hand, but on the other hand, through the use of these additives, it makes the plastics problematic for human health and the environment. And the Stockholm Convention is there to address the problem of those additives. Going back to the plastic waste amendments, since they are mentioned in the ministerial statements, these were adopted by decision 1412. They have been in force since the 1st of January 2021. And what those amendments have ensured is that the different types of plastic waste have been classified in accordance with their perceived or actual concern to human health and the environment. So we have those listed in Annex 2 and in Annex 8, which are covered by the PIC procedure and the minimization and ESM obligations. And then those that are not perceived to have a negative impact on human health and the environment that are listed in Annex 9. This is just a slide. If you wish to click on it, you'll have a history of the plastic waste amendments under the Basel Convention. Another element that is mentioned in the ministerial statement are the technical guidelines that have been adopted at the last COP in 2023. So COP 16, this was historical development on the framework of the Basel Convention, and the technical guidelines are there to help parties with the classification of the plastic wastes in Annex 2, in Annex 8, in Annex 9, because depending on where they fit, the obligations of parties will differ. It also provides comprehensive guidance on how to adjust the legal regulatory frameworks at the national level to incorporate those plastic waste amendments. And then it gives guidance on the different pillars of the Basel Convention. So waste prevention and minimization and environmentally sound management. starting with handling and ending with disposal. Why is it so important? And I just wanted to link these technical guidelines with the control of international trade, because these guidelines are useful as such for any party that even generates domestic plastic waste to know how best to manage that waste in an environmentally sound manner. But the control of international trade of plastic waste really hinges on the definition of environmentally sound management of plastic waste, because this trade should not take place if there is not a contract between the exporter and the importer defining and ensuring that the waste will be managed in an environmentally sound way. But what does it mean? Well, you have the guidance to explain and to help determine whether there will be or not ESM of plastic waste. And if a country of export sees a proposed movement to a country that's not backed by the existence of this contract, then the movement cannot proceed. So the international trade should not take place. So these guidelines have this dual purpose. First, for any waste, plastic waste that's generated, wherever it's generated, to help countries ensure ESM of the plastic waste and then prevent pollution, but also to make sure that the trade of plastic waste relies in a guarantee that the waste will not just be dumped at the end of the transfer. Turning to the Stockholm Convention, sorry, one slide back. So these are the names of the chemicals, and I won't go and list them because I'm not as proficient as my colleagues. That's just to clarify that among the 34 persistent organic pollutants that are listed in the convention, 17 are plastics-related chemicals. So basically, you can use the Stockholm Convention really as a very concrete tool to target the most harmful chemicals that are used in producing plastics. And at this time, there's 17 already regulated under the convention, but there are currently 2 under review. And those 2 have already been recommended for listing under the convention. This would take place at the next meeting of the Conference of the Parties in April, May 2025. This has already been recommended. The POPROC is still refining the scope of its recommendations, including possible exemptions. But through the Stockholm Convention, you have this very important tool to address at the source the most challenging chemicals that are used in producing plastics. Now, this is the scope of the implementation support provided to parties through the 3 conventions: prevention, minimization, waste management, control of trade in plastic waste, and addressing and targeting the hazardous constituents, mainly through the Stockholm Convention. At this time, and I'm mindful of the time limit, just to tell you 2 words about ongoing work. The work on improving the PIC procedure under the Basel Convention, and we were pleased to welcome our colleagues from the WTO during the last meeting of the Small Intersessional Working Group in March. It's of interest to your community in the WTO and beyond, because the purpose is to try to see whether there are challenges in implementing the PIC procedure and how these could be overcome. And there's a report with quite a range of options that are being considered at this time. It will go to the open-ended working group in June and again to the COP next April, May 2025, if you're interested in seeing what is done now to actually improve the functioning of the PIC procedure under Basel. There's also another stream of work which is looking at the digitalization of the control procedure under the Basel Convention. And this is another small intersessional working group working on exploring improvements and possibilities of having electronic approaches to the PIC procedure. Our colleague from WCO talked about the work we're doing in cooperation with WCO in terms of HS codes, so just another area of cooperation between our organizations to mention. I think I wanted to stop here. We are very happy to be able to work with all our colleagues in the different organizations. Again, our colleague in WCO mentioned that it's equally important to have the member states or our parties, as far as we're concerned, to cooperate at the national level. And I think that by having both levels of coordination, cooperation, national level, international level, we can just be doing the right thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Juliette. And it's true, there's a lot of effort going, a lot of work going in different for us. So that's just another reminder of the importance of working together and, avoiding duplications and trying to make the best of these efforts. So we are getting very close to the end of our session, but I do want to provide the opportunity for maybe one or two quick questions. I have a couple of questions from participants online, but since I have quite a good number of people that came in person, I want to give the opportunity to see if anyone here has a quick question. It has to be short, I'm sorry, because we don't have a lot of time. But if anyone in the room wants to. Good, okay, so you forfeit your right of asking first. I would just, maybe one is quite quick. It's actually for UNCTAD. There was just a question on where they can find the report that on difference in terms of life expectancy. I think there's interest in the report. I understood that it's upcoming, but I'll let Chantaline talk about that. And then it's an open, not a very easy question, it's an open question here from IPEN. What steps would you, and I think they are open, who would answer this, recommend for any civil society willing to work towards an environmentally sustainable plastics trade in developing countries? I guess UNCTAD is also well placed for that tricky question. So, well, anyone who can answer, but first, Chantalino on the study.
Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, as you mentioned, it is upcoming. Do we have a sense of when it's still in the process? It's not. It's going to be a few months before, but very interesting work. And in terms of civil society, we feel when we work in developing countries that they're very important in the policymaking process side of things, but also in the acceptability, if you want. So, and we, they can register to be a civil society registered with UNCTAD to come to our conference, but they also are more than welcome to contact us, and we see how we can help them help us. Because as I think the ambassadors have both said, we can't do this alone. We have to do it all together. So, and that I want to stick to my 5 minutes. So I didn't thank everybody, but I want to thank Aiko and Danielle and Sandra and then Diana that I just met, but also the ambassadors. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Chantaline. Thank you so much. And I see there are a couple of more questions. I guess we can communicate them if they are directed to anyone specifically later. But unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our. Yes, please, Ambassador.
Yes, I just wanted to respond to IPEN's question about what steps do we recommend for any civil society willing to work towards an environmentally sustainable plastics trade in developing countries. The first is to support MSMEs who are involved in developing plastic substitutes and alternatives, especially support them to use indigenous materials to do this. So in the Caribbean, for example, we are exploring using coconut husk to be able to do plastic substitutes. We're looking at seaweed as possible plastic substitutes and alternatives as well. So you need to support the homegrown MSMEs in developing countries to see this as a viable economic strategy for them. The second, get youth on board. Honestly, this is where a lot of the momentum is going to come from. Get them involved, give them the tools to be able to be real advocates for this. And related to that is on education. It's also about education, educating the population, helping them to understand the implications of their choices and consumer preferences. That I think would be really key as well. Lobby your government to support MSMEs to get access to finance, because that is one of the most fundamental barriers for MSMEs to be able to invest in new lines of production and innovative work, is access to finance. And then finally, lobby the private sector in developing countries to lead by example. In Barbados, for example, when we had the regulation on banning single-use plastic bags, what really helped this was some of the big supermarket chains in Barbados having the most beautiful reusable bags for customers to use. It was part advertising on their part, but it responded to, it spoke to the sensibility of the population. It was vibrant, it was user-friendly. You know, you can see tourists using it. I have 3 of these reusable bags here with me in Geneva, you know, so speak to the private sector in developing countries and get them on board to see this as a economic pathway that they can also still make profit through moving away from single-use plastics. So that's my recipe. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador. And I think you also touched on another question that came online on the role of consumers in this effort. And I think through your example, I think consumers do react and respond when there is something that is available to them, that is useful, that is user-friendly, as you said, and you know that calls their attention. So I think it's a duality there. It's very, very interesting. Any other reactions from panelists here or online? Yes, please, Chantal.
Just to add one word to what Ambassador Wilson just said, MSMEs and entrepreneurs.
Very good. And UNCTAD has been working a lot with them, so they have a lot to say on the case. Fantastic. So now I have the pleasure to give the floor to my director, Eiko Lin, Director of the Trade and Environment Division at the WTO, for some closing remarks and reflections. Please hold.
Thanks very much, Danielle. You know, I have to thank all of you for making the effort to come here. Gen Network in particular, all my colleagues, of course, from my team, Sandra, Danielle, Marion, and many others, and of course the ambassadors for joining us, actually spending all the time with us this afternoon, you know, and everyone online and the delegates as well. But I wanted to just say a few words that are, of course, a little bit more than thanks, because I think that's very clear that we're very thankful for all this effort. And try to do it in a way that will not destroy Danielle's moderation, because he's been so good on timing so far. So I'll try to be brief. I think the first thing was that the dialogue on plastics journey was very much at I recall it from the beginning, you know, and it has been quite a journey. I mean, when it first became as a topic, thanks very much to the co-sponsoring countries and the co-coordinators who brought this to WTO, I must say it was not very obvious for many members, also for trade experts, as to what would this be about and how would this dialogue actually work and what would it actually produce. So it's really to the credit of all of you, actually, the stakeholders as well, that actually make this from a sort of idea into something that was a dialogue, and then into a process, and now today to actually have a ministerial statement with actions being proposed and principles. And in a WTO context, this has actually been remarkably fast, if I can say so, you know, and I think it points to a few things. One is, why has it happened so quickly? Because of the urgency. Many of you here have pointed out much better than I can as to why this is so urgent. A strong collective will to actually address this urgency, and some pathways that have become very obvious to us over the time of the work of the dialogue, and I think also with those outside in the MEA processes and etc., that a systems change away from pollution through plastics is not possible without cooperation. So that's, I think, in essence, what a lot of the work has been about. But here, I'd like to go a little bit further. I won't repeat about all the things that have been said already by all the experts, but try to boil it down to 2 things when thinking about the call to action, or I would say continued call to action, because the call to action has already happened. And it's really very basic. It's about substance and form. And today we've heard a lot of substance. The ministerial action and statement and accompanying annex has a lot of substance as well, focus on single-use plastics, and that's fantastic. And that action now has to be accompanied with a little bit more if I can put it this way, thinking on the form. What form would this action take? And it's quite a unique form, and I think the collective creative thinking here will be required because it's a non-traditional sort of dialogue from a WTO perspective. So what would this form of action actually take? We have examples from the United Nations, foras, and other organizations of different types of commitments, different types of collective actions, voluntary pledges, and so forth. There's also a lot more creativity that could be looked at in terms of whether are these actions only by member governments? Are they actions involving collective groups beyond governments? I don't have an answer, but just to put it out to you, I think this would be great for the dialogue, and I think you have already committed yourself to be working on this with the timeline to deliver by our Ministerial Conference, WTO Ministerial Conference, which is in at least 2 years' time. And of course, there's the INC process as well that we are looking very much forward to. And then in terms of what these actions can be, I mean, again, there's such a long list, and I think in the interest of time, I won't go through it all, but the three big ones: reduction. We've heard it very clearly through a lot of the discussions here that it's not just about different practices. We have to reduce. We have to actually reduce our production and consumption of plastics, and different ways to think about that using trade tools. And trade tools are not going to change, whether you're talking about plastics, talking about any other type of sector. The trade tools remain the combination of tariffs, regulations, and standards. They could involve subsidies. They could involve government procurement. So we know the tools. The question is about adapting them to this particular challenge. And the Ministerial Statement has really done a lot of work on that. Promoting trade, Ambassador Wilson and also Ambassador Valencia spoke also about different ways to promote a more sustainable trade. And therefore that calls on the need to look at alternatives, substitutes, and so forth. And trade policy, very important lever into whether we do promote this trade or not. And again, and I think it's a lot of very rich ideas already been given by the panelists and experts and so forth. And then the last one is really cross-cutting elements. I think this came through so much through the discussion here, is that a lot of the work here to make it possible, and I think this has been the experience of the dialogue on plastics as well, really requires cooperation with other international processes, be that through the World Customs Organization, the UNEA process with the INC, or as we heard from Basel, Stockholm, Rotterdam, and possibly many more. And another big cross-cutting element that I don't think we heard that much about today, but I think maybe through what Ambassador Wilson said at the end, was the need for a lot more capacity building, tailored technical assistance, solutions to create opportunities from this transition from an economy that is polluting to an economy that is much more sustainable. So I think there's a lot there. And so I won't belabor the point, apart from to thank you all, and that we would really encourage Gen Network to come here more often. And that would be nice. And that we can have this type of discussion again in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ho. And now I pass the floor to Jen to take us to the end and tell us, Diana, what are the next steps in your dialogue?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel, for the moderation. Thank you all, to our speakers, but also to all the attendees who join us online and here at WTO today. I just wanted to flag the upcoming dialogues. In the next days, we will be discussing topics such as actually another topic on trade, because plastic waste trade we'll be discussing. We'll be discussing human rights obligations and also health issues, and look also at a poll that the Greenpeace launched in 19 countries. So I invite you all to join us. All those 4 events are online. so to join us as we run up to the Ottawa meeting, to join these sessions online. And thank you very much for having us here today. And we look forward to engage on this topic and other topics here at the World Trade Organization and in the other trade-related bodies in Geneva.